Family abandoned me because sis blames me for her divorce. Years later, I get an email out of nowhere explaining me everything w/proof. So I ruined her life with it. I'm 29 years old, and 7 years ago my family destroyed my life in a single day. My older sister Melissa came home hysterical, announcing she'd filed for divorce because her husband Derek had been cheating on her for 6 months. Then she threw me under the bus, claimed I'd introduced my friend Rachel to Derek, and that Rachel was the affair partner. My parents believed her instantly, despite zero proof. Within 24 hours, I was kicked out of the house at 22 years old with nowhere to go. I was financially unstable, working my first real job, and had been living at home to save money. Before I go any further, drop a comment right now and tell me, where are you watching from? I want to know who's hearing this story. The worst part? Rachel wasn't even the one having an affair. I knew for a fact she had a serious boyfriend and was planning her wedding. But my parents had always favored Melissa. I was the unplanned second child, always sidelined, always second best. But I never thought it would lead to this. I didn't understand why they kicked me out just because Melissa said so. She accused me of ruining her marriage simply because I'd introduced Rachel to Derek. My parents agreed with her. And what they did next still haunts me. I remember standing in the living room, my hands shaking as I tried to explain. Melissa's face was red and blotchy from crying, mascara running down her cheeks in dark streaks. My parents just stared at me with these cold, empty eyes. Like they were looking at a stranger. My mom's hand was pressed against her mouth, and my dad had pushed his chair back so hard it scraped against the floor. The sound still echoes in my head sometimes. You introduced them, Melissa screamed at me, pointing with a trembling finger. This is your fault. You knew Marcus was vulnerable and you set this up? That's insane, I said, my voice cracking. Rachel would never do that. She's getting married. My dad stood up, and I'd never seen that look on his face before. Pure disgust. How could you do this to your sister? I tried to protest, tried to make them see reason, but they weren't listening. My mom just kept shaking her head, and within an hour she looked at me with an expression I'll never forget and said 5 words that would haunt me for years: pack your things. Tonight. I was literally sobbing on the sidewalk with all my stuff stuffed into garbage bags for an hour before I could pull myself together enough to go to a friend's house for the night. Neighbors were peeking through their curtains, watching the family drama unfold. The concrete was cold beneath me, and my phone kept lighting up as I tried calling my parents over and over. Every call went straight to voicemail. They'd already blocked me. The next few days were a blur of desperation. I tried contacting them every single day, but I had no luck. My friend was kind enough to let me live at his place until I could find an apartment for myself. But my parents had made up their minds that I was wrong, that I was responsible for the divorce. My mom and dad had actually told me they were disgusted by what I'd done before kicking me out. It didn't even make sense because it wasn't as if I'd been the one Derek supposedly cheated with. They'd blocked my number completely, so I couldn't get through to them at all. When I tried to visit the house a few days later, standing in the rain outside my childhood home with my hand raised to knock, my mom's face appeared in the window. She was shaking her head. Then she opened the door just a crack and said through gritted teeth, "Leave now or I'm calling the police." "I'm your son." I shouted. "Just listen to me." The door slammed. I heard the locks click into place. That's when I finally realized they were serious about this. They actually blamed me for whatever had happened. My sister had always been the favorite child. My parents had never really planned for a second child, so I'd always gotten sidelined. But I didn't know it would lead to something this massive. For the next couple of weeks, I tried to figure things out myself. Melissa and my parents had cut me off altogether, and I had no way to get to them. I couldn't speak to Derek either because he'd blocked me too, which made absolutely no sense. I couldn't find him because both Melissa and Derek had vacated the house they used to live in and had left to live with their respective parents instead. There was no way to get through to anyone involved. I was completely shut out. But then I realized there was one person who could tell me the truth. Rachel. She and I weren't really close, but I had to do what I had to do. So I asked to meet her one day and explained the entire situation. We sat in a coffee shop, and I watched her face go from confused to horrified as I told her what Melissa had said. An affair? Rachel's voice was loud enough that people at nearby tables turned to look. With Derek? I met him maybe 3 times, and it was always professional. I knew it, I said, relief flooding through me. I knew you wouldn't do that. Why would she lie about something like this? Rachel pulled out her phone, scrolling through photos. I've had a steady boyfriend for 2 years. We're getting married in 3 months. Look. She showed me pictures of her and her fiancé, engagement photos, vacation shots, dinner dates. Her engagement ring caught the light as she moved her hand. Her story was way more convincing than whatever Melissa had said. I had no proof, but I just knew somehow that Melissa had been lying about the real reason for the divorce. But since I had no proof, I couldn't go back to my family. And I most certainly couldn't go back without it. Back then, I was pretty desperate to go back to living with my family. I really missed them despite what they'd done to me. But with time, I was able to get over it and move on with my life. I managed to find a place and made my job the purpose of my life so I'd have something to distract myself with. I had to pay the bills, so it was a better way of coping than just sitting around being depressed. I didn't have any other option. I was hurting a lot, but I knew I had to go on somehow, with or without my family's support. I remember holding the keys to my first apartment, standing in those empty rooms that echoed when I walked. Late nights at the office became my new normal, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead while I buried myself in work. I'd cross days off the calendar, watching time pass. My friend kept telling me I was going to be okay, that I was stronger than I thought. I have to be, I'd whisper to myself in those dark moments. Years passed. Things started getting better. Then I met Nina, and my life finally felt like it was coming together. I'd moved from my tiny apartment to a much bigger one. I got a promotion. I started to feel like maybe I could be happy again. And then, around a week ago, I got engaged to Nina. We'd been together for 2 years, and when I asked her to marry me, it felt like the first truly good thing that had happened since my family abandoned me. Nina usually only posted on Instagram, but our engagement picture made it to her Facebook feed as well, where she had a wider audience. It was a public post, and a lot of people saw it. Including my ex-brother-in-law Derek. He happened to be someone Nina had met at a seminar a few years back. She's a doctor, and she'd ended up adding him on Facebook. That's how he found me. It really is a small world, and for the first time, I was glad about it. I can't believe how many people are seeing this, Nina said, scrolling through the notifications on her phone. We were sitting on the couch, and she was practically glowing. I'm just happy, I told her. Finally feels like life is going right. She squeezed my hand. You deserve this. You deserve to be happy. 3 days later, something arrived that would change everything. A package showed up at my door with no return address. Just my name written in handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside were printed documents, text message logs, social media screenshots, bank statements, divorce settlement papers. And a handwritten note that made my hands start shaking. She lied about everything. I'm sorry I blocked you. This is the truth. D. I spread the papers across my kitchen table, and Nina came up behind me, gasping when she saw what I was reading. The messages were between Melissa and someone named Jordan, discussing how easy it is to fool Derek. There were romantic confessions, plans for where they'd meet next. Melissa had even signed her messages with her middle name, something not many people knew. Oh my God, I whispered, reading through the messages again and again. Oh my God. What is it? Nina leaned over my shoulder. She was the one cheating. She blamed me. My vision was blurring, and I realized I was crying. But these weren't sad tears. They were angry tears. 7 years of pain suddenly making sense. Are you serious? After all this time? But that wasn't even the worst part. The divorce settlement documents showed that Melissa had to sell Derek's grandmother's diamond ring because she couldn't afford to pay him in the settlement. And then I saw who she'd been cheating with. Jordan. My friend who worked as a cashier at the grocery store near their house. I never would have made the connection myself. I'd literally never seen them together. They'd kept it well under wraps, but not well enough for Derek to not find out. When Derek confronted Melissa, she told him it was my fault. She claimed I'd introduced her to Jordan. She said I'd told her that Jordan was an aspiring photographer and needed her help since she was skilled with cameras and editing. She'd agreed to help him, and they'd fallen in love before they knew it. But the worst part? She told Derek I was in on it. That I had helped them keep the affair hidden for months. That's why Derek had blocked me. He thought I'd orchestrated my sister's affair. Obviously, all of this was a complete lie. I hadn't even known that Jordan and Melissa had something going on. She told him I set it up, I said, my voice shaking with rage. That I was in on it. Nina's hand was on my shoulder. That's why they kicked you out. She destroyed my life to cover her own affair. I gripped the papers so hard they crinkled in my hands. What am I going to do? I finally understood why they'd been so quick to throw me out. She'd needed someone to blame, and I was the perfect scapegoat. But now I had proof. And I was going to use it. I figured out it must have been Derek who sent this package. He'd found my address through Nina's medical practice directory. He'd sent physical evidence instead of an email because he'd learned during the divorce that Melissa monitored his digital communications obsessively. I got in touch with him immediately through Nina's Facebook. We needed to talk. We met at a coffee shop a few days later. Derek looked tired, older than I remembered. His eyes had dark circles under them. We sat in a corner booth, and I spread the evidence across the table between us. I should have reached out sooner, Derek said quietly. I'm sorry. We both got played, I told him. But now we make this right. What did you have in mind? I leaned forward. I want them to feel what I felt. Public. Humiliating. Undeniable. Derek told me he'd found out about Melissa's lies from Rachel, who he'd run into a couple of years back. I'd told Rachel to keep my side of the story a secret back then, and I was kicking myself for it. If I hadn't said that, she probably would have told Derek, and I could have proved my innocence ages ago. Derek confessed that he'd wanted to talk to me about it but felt weird, embarrassed. I forgave him because I needed his help to destroy Melissa. And I knew he'd be on board with it too. Melissa had been lying to my parents so she'd have financial support during her divorce. She'd thrown me under the bus for good measure because she knew that one conversation with Rachel and I'd know the truth. I couldn't wrap my head around how someone related to me by blood could be this selfish. But it was finally out now, and I was going to use it to ruin her life just like she'd ruined mine all those years ago. I didn't know if my family still lived in the same house since I hadn't visited for 7 years. But as luck would have it, they hadn't moved. I confirmed with an old neighbor of mine before showing up. And Melissa was still living with them. That wasn't very surprising because Melissa had always been lazy, hated doing any work herself. If she had the option of living with her aging parents and making them do all the chores for her, she'd definitely take it. But I wasn't going to confront them immediately. I had a better plan. A calculated, multi-phase approach that would make Melissa suffer the way I had suffered. First, I anonymously sent copies of Melissa's text messages to her school principal. The messages showed her discussing the affair and manipulating Derek during work hours. The timestamps proved she'd been using school computers and texting during class time. An ethics investigation began at the school. I had my old neighbor keep me updated on what was happening. Something's going on with Melissa, the neighbor texted me a few days later. She looks stressed. Good, I told Nina. This is just the beginning. Nina looked at me with concern. You're really going through with this? She had 7 years of peace, I said. That's over now. But I wasn't done yet. Phase 2 was going to hit even closer to home. I wanted her to feel the walls closing in before the final blow. 2 days later, I sent my parents an anonymous letter with just one piece of evidence, a photo of Melissa and Jordan together at a hotel, timestamped during her marriage. The note said, ask Melissa about Jordan. Ask her about Derek's grandmother's ring. Ask her what she told Derek about your son. For 2 weeks, my neighbor kept me updated. Melissa was unraveling. The school investigation was creating stress. My parents were asking uncomfortable questions. She couldn't keep her story straight. They were starting to doubt her. Your dad cornered her in the kitchen this morning, the neighbor texted. Heard shouting. What did he say? I asked. Couldn't hear exact words, but he was demanding answers about something. I texted Derek, it's working. They're starting to question her. I could have exposed her right then and there. But I wanted her to suffer like I had suffered. And then, the perfect opportunity presented itself. My aunt's annual summer barbecue was coming up in 1 week. Extended family, neighbors, friends, everyone would be there. Including my parents and Melissa. It was time for phase 3. Derek and I coordinated everything. 30+ people would attend this barbecue. We'd present the truth together as a united front, 2 victims of Melissa's manipulation. I prepared a professional presentation folder, organized with tabs, highlighted sections. Everything in chronological order. Derek practiced being factual, not emotional, like giving a business presentation. I confirmed with my aunt that Melissa and my parents were attending. They had no idea we were coming. The morning of the barbecue, I pressed my shirt carefully and took a deep breath before getting in the car. Derek called me. You ready for this? I've been ready for 7 years. Nina touched my arm. You sure about doing it so publicly? She destroyed me publicly, I said. Turnabout's fair play. We arrived separately. I walked into my aunt's backyard and saw them, my parents at the picnic table, Melissa laughing with cousins like she didn't have a care in the world. They had no idea their world was about to end. Derek arrived a few minutes after me. When Melissa saw us together, all the color drained from her face. She went completely pale and tried to leave, but my father stopped her, confused about why Derek was there. In front of 30+ people in that backyard, I didn't yell. I didn't create drama. I simply said, loud enough for everyone to hear, 7 years ago, you kicked me out based on lies. You never asked for proof. You never questioned Melissa's story. Today, you're going to hear the truth. Conversations around us started dying down. People were turning to look. Derek stepped forward with the professional presentation folder, his voice calm and measured, like he was giving a business report. Here's what actually happened, Derek said. Melissa had an affair. Not me. She blamed your son for introducing her to Jordan and claimed he was in on it. She manipulated everyone to secure financial support during the divorce. She sold my grandmother's ring to fund the affair. Here's the evidence. He opened the folder. Text messages. Photos. Bank records. Settlement documents. Papers rustled as people leaned in to see. My aunt picked up the folder, her eyes widening as she read. You threw me out without even asking questions, I said, my voice steady despite the rage burning in my chest. Melissa tried her classic tactic. Tears started streaming down her face. You're taking this out of context? You're ganging up on me. But we had documents. Witnesses could see them with their own eyes. My aunt was reading aloud now. This says she sold your grandmother's ring in the settlement. My father turned to Melissa, his face red. Explain. Explain this right now. She couldn't. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Extended family members were passing the folder around now, reading the messages, looking at the photos. The truth was spreading in real time, and there was nothing Melissa could do to stop it. My mother's face showed shock first, then humiliation. She grabbed my father's arm. They left the barbecue early, taking Melissa with them in complete silence. No apologies. No explanations. Just shame. Comment below and tell me, what would you have done in this situation? Would you have confronted them privately, or would you have exposed them publicly like I did? For the next few days, I waited. My parents didn't react immediately. They were in shock, humiliated in front of the entire extended family. But on day 3, I got news from a friend who taught at Melissa's school. The ethics investigation had concluded. Melissa was formally reprimanded and transferred to a different school. It was a clear demotion that everyone in her professional circle would notice. Her reputation was destroyed. On day 5, my parents finally sent me a message. But it wasn't an apology. It was a justification. They wanted to move past this and heal as a family before my wedding. They claimed they'd made an honest mistake and I was being too harsh. I couldn't believe what I was reading. An honest mistake? 7 years of my life, gone. 7 years of pain and isolation. And they called it a mistake? I had a lawyer friend draft a formal cease and desist letter. Nina read over my shoulder as I typed, you made a choice 7 years ago based on favoritism, not facts. You threw your son onto the street without proof or compassion. That wasn't a mistake, it was cruelty. Any future contact will be considered harassment. How do you feel? Nina asked after I hit send. I feel free, I said. For the first time in 7 years, I feel free. But Melissa wasn't done yet. 2 weeks later, she showed up at my apartment building. She didn't scream or cry this time. She was cold, calculated, angry. She stood in the hallway outside my door and wouldn't leave. You destroyed my reputation on purpose, she hissed. You could have told them privately. You didn't have to humiliate me like that. Like you humiliated me? I said through the door. When you had them throw me out with garbage bags on the sidewalk? When you took away my entire family with your lies? I had no choice. Her voice was getting louder. I needed their support. I couldn't let them know the truth. I pulled out my phone and started recording. In my state, single-party consent for recordings is legal. You're admitting it. You're admitting you lied. Thank you, that's on recording now. She realized what she'd said, and her eyes went wide. I called building security. They escorted her out while she screamed about how unfair I was being. I filed for a restraining order the next day, using the recording as evidence, her own admission of the lies. But my parents still weren't done. Week 3 brought another attempt. They showed up at Nina's medical practice, trying to corner her in the parking lot, hoping she'd convince me to reconcile. Nina called me immediately, and I had my lawyer friend send them a formal trespass warning. One more incident and we'd file harassment charges. Week 4, Melissa tried to turn the extended family against me. She sent a group email to everyone, claiming I'd ambushed and humiliated her at a family event and was destroying her life out of spite. I replied to all with a simple message, attached is the full evidence package. Judge for yourself who the liar is. I included everything, the messages, the photos, the settlement documents, her recorded admission. The family fractured after that. Some older relatives tried to play peacemaker, but the younger generation reached out to me privately with support. My cousins, people I'd grown up with, sent me messages saying they'd always sensed something was off about Melissa. They were glad I finally got my truth out there. Then came month 2. My parents made one final attempt. They showed up at my apartment with Melissa. All 3 of them, standing in my hallway. Through the door, I heard my dad say, we've taken her back in. Both our children deserve second chances. Come to dinner. Let's work this out civilly. I responded from behind my locked door, my voice steady and final. I never needed a second chance. I didn't do anything wrong. You made your choice 7 years ago. Live with it. My mother's voice cracked. Please, we're family. You stopped being my family 7 years ago, I said. Goodbye. I heard their footsteps fade down the hallway. Nina wrapped her arms around me, and for a moment, we just stood there in silence. The next day, I sent one final message through my lawyer. Any further contact from you, your daughter, or anyone on your behalf will result in legal action for harassment. You are not welcome at my wedding. You are not part of my life. Consider this permanent. I blocked all their numbers, their social media accounts, their email addresses. Nina and I informed our wedding venue security about 3 people who were not permitted entry under any circumstances. We even gave them photos. That's where I left it. They made their choice 7 years ago when they threw me out without proof, without question, without mercy. Now I get to make mine. I blocked them all. Wedding security has their photos. They're out of my life permanently. And you know what? For the first time in 7 years, I feel free. Really, truly free. My sister destroyed my life with lies, and 7 years later I destroyed hers with the truth. No regrets. So that's my story. If you made it this far, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories like this. Drop a comment and let me know, did I go too far, or did she get exactly what she deserved? Thank you for watching. See you in next one.